Hi, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, depending on where you are. Welcome to the VFX Reference Platform user group. I'm Nick Cannon. I'm one of your co-hosts today. Just to introduce myself, for those who don't know me, I am the CTO at Walt Disney Animation Studios. That's my day job. But my volunteer job on the side is being a co-leader of the VFX Reference Platform. And my co-leader and co-conspirator is here too.
Hi, I'm Nick's less better half, and my day job is actually being CTO at Lucasfilm and Industrial Light and Magic.
Right, we've got a bunch of stuff to get through today, and we're excited to be hosting this one, completely virtually. It's a little bit of a change for us to do this outside of SIGGRAPH. We're adjacent to it, but not part of the event now. The idea is, we can be accessible to everyone. We've just hit 100 attendees, so that's good. It's continuing to climb, so it's good to see, there's still interest in this and support. Just some housekeeping. We are recording this. We've not yet decided how or whether we're going to share this recording. I guess we'll see how it goes, maybe. But yes, we're recording it, and we might be live streaming it. I'm not sure, and we're going to go around the world. So bear that in mind when you're commenting or saying anything later. I just want to say a big shout out to the Visual Effects Society, who are loaning us the use of their Zoom webinar feature, and also just for all the support the VS has for the VFX Reference Platform. Really, the platform is governed by the Visual Effects Society Technology Committee, of which Francois and I are members. And so huge thank you to that committee and to members of the VS for supporting this initiative. So what are we going to talk about today? We are going to talk about a quick introduction for those. There's lots of familiar names I'm seeing there, but there may be some of you who are new to the VFX platform. So Francois will give a quick introduction. Then we'll quickly get to talking about the platform for next year, 2024. Then JF Panacea is going to join us to talk about the Academy of Software Foundation Docker initiative. Then we are going to revisit the Linux recommendation report from 12 months ago. Some stuff happened recently, and so we want to give an update on kind of where we are with that recommendation. And then we've got quickly some tips and gotchas for upgrading to Enterprise Linux 8 or 9. And then hopefully we'll have plenty of time at the end for Q&A and discussion, and we can bring, we only have chat going right now, but for those of you who want to contribute and come on camera, you'll be able to do that as well, if time permitting. So with that, I will hand over to Francois.
Yeah, and I'll make this quick, but like Nick mentioned, there's the chat. You can ask us questions directly. Also, please use the Q&A feature as we go along. We'll keep an eye on it, and then start answering them at the end if they don't get answered during the actual presentation. So here, quick summary for those less familiar with the Visual Effects Reference Platform. It's a set of tool and library versions that can be used as a common target platform by the software vendors and also the consumers. It is also a neutral and independent volunteer effort that's governed by the tech committee. And most importantly, I'd say it's guidance that's aimed at the software vendors, not all of the users. It's really the software vendors to encourage them to target their major releases at the platform, which we update annually. Each year there's a set of versions that are agreed upon. But now let's talk a little bit about why it's needed. You want to go to the next slide. These are the original goals of the Visual Effects Reference Platform from 2014, and they're still valid today. But specifically, it's aligning software providers to eliminate these incompatibilities that we had always seen in the past between common dependencies that we all had to deal with between DCC software, creating a transparent process that fairly represents the interests of both the software vendors and the end user studios who have to consume and develop for these applications. Reducing the complexity and the effort required to support Linux specifically in the visual effects and animation world, and very proactively lowering the barrier to adopting Linux as a supported platform for software providers and end user studios. And we've made a lot more progress historically on resolving the incompatibilities, like that first part, and moving the platform forward than we have with lowering the barriers for Linux support. In many ways, that the version-itis issue was a first step. Last year, we pushed a whole lot more on that with the Linux OS recommendation effort, and we'll talk a little bit more about that today. But ultimately, we're really trying to ease the support burden for everybody's integrated pipelines and find common ground for reducing software development friction and allowing everyone to focus on pushing the state of the art where it matters most. So How does this work? Like Nick said, this is governed and under the umbrella of the VS Tech Committee. And there is a working group that has 2 representatives each from the Visual Effects Society. That's Nick and I, we're kind of everybody's mascot, and 2 representatives from each of the 3 major software vendors, Autodesk, Foundry, and Side Effects. And we have regular meetings. We have initial discussions in this small group to at least get the main players to agree. And then all proposals that come out of those discussions go to the community. This is the VFX Platform Discuss Google group. Anybody can join. And it isn't, there are no decisions that are being made behind closed doors, just initial discussion, straw proposals, and then getting the community's feedback on those is how we iterate as we move a little bit closer to the date where we finalize the platform. We regularly engage with the Academy Software Foundation's Technical Advisory Council. And under that umbrella, there is the CI working group that puts the platform into practice. It makes builds available. It provides feedback on what's actually working or not. We've been able to get a lot faster feedback on incompatibilities we didn't expect, thanks to the Academy Software Foundation's working group than we ever have in the past. And JF is going to talk a little bit more about some of the work that's been done there today. And then, Nick, maybe you can mention a fun thing that happened this year.
Sure. Yeah, just very quickly, if I can change slides. I just want to say, so the VFX Reference Platform won an award, and the community won an award, for which Francois and I were very honored and proud to collect on everyone's behalf. But the Annie Awards, which is the kind of annual awards for the animation industry, they have one technology award, the iWorks, which is a juried award. And very pleased on to say that that the VFX Reference Platform was the winner this year in their 50th year. So yeah, huge congratulations to everybody, because really, again, it's a community effort. And thank you to everyone for the work you put in to this effort. And I think it's just a recognition of the impact this work has on the broader industry and the broader community. So thank you. Right, and then now on to more exciting stuff. Let's talk about software versions. Let's not do awards boring stuff. So it's 2024. What are we planning on doing? So it's this is still a draft at this stage. So we're still open to feedback, although we're getting to the end of that stage. So at this point, hopefully not sort of suggestions, but more about calling out issues or concerns. And as a reminder, here's the eye chart, which we've shown the last few years. So apologies for for the density of this. But as a reminder, here's all the versions we have for 2023. And then each year, what we're trying to do is strike a balance between what's moving forward and changing and what's staying the same. We don't want to change everything every year because it's too much of a burden and too much engineering effort goes into platform support rather than developing the features in the software, in the artist tools that we really want and need in production. So what's staying the same this year? All these things are staying the same. A couple of things to call out at the bottom there, Intel, TBB, and MKL. We had indicated we were going to move to the one API this year. After lots of consultation with various teams, not least the team at Intel working on these things, we decided to wait another year. So we're going to push that out to 25. They're going to make some changes, or they are making some changes in TBB to help with some of the more complex integration into some more complex tools, DCC tools and USD and things like that. So we pushed that out a year. And another thing that's staying the same that's notable is GCC and glibc. I know every year there's a vocal group who are advocating for pushing the compiler forwards to a more recent version for very excellent reasons. The challenge we have, as actually highlighted, Mark Manker, for those that saw it, Mark Manker from Pixar, who has a product, the RenderMan team, he wrote a great post on VFX Platform Discuss, just very eloquently describing some of the considerations that software vendors have to deal with. And so, we're going to aim to update the compiler probably every other year, roughly speaking. We're not going to, don't hold us to that, but that's as a rough guidance. And we already just updated it for 23. So we're going to hold it where it is for 24, so that the software vendors can help focus more on features and less on platform support. And that's to make space for some other big changes that are happening. Well, this is a small one. On the compiler front, there's a bit of acknowledgement here. Although we're staying in Visual Studio 2022 on Windows, we probably moved to 2022 a little bit early in its life. There were some issues in some of the earlier versions of the C compiler there. So what we're saying is on Windows, minimum of version 17.4, please, when you hit 2024. And in future, we might be a little bit more circumspect about adopting new releases of Visual Studio. And the big one is Qt or Qt, whatever your preference in how you say it. I'll go for the official Qt pronunciation. So we're moving to Qt 6 finally. As some would say, we're long overdue to do this. We've been holding out for two reasons, really. One, it's a lot of effort, and so it was been hard to find the time to do this. But also, there's a feeling it wasn't quite ready yet. It's definitely ready now. Arguably, arguably it was ready last year. But we've been working closely with the Qt company, talking with them, having meetings with them, and the big digital content creation software vendors. I think we're all feeling like now is the time. And we're all somewhat nervous after the experience of going from Qt 4 to Qt 5. For those of you involved in that, that was a much bigger effort than we were anticipating. The Qt company assure us that they've learned lessons from that, and the migration from 5 to 6 is going to be more straightforward. So lots of the big software vendors have already started this work, and so yeah, expect and plan for that in the major releases next year. What else is changing? Python, there was some debate about this one too. The big thing that swung us to update to 3.11 for this year is that some big performance improvements in 3.11, which is a particular benefit to studios running a lot of Python code in their pipeline. There was some debate about should we go to 3.12. The timing, unfortunately, the way that the release timing of the platform and the release schedule of Python isn't quite in alignment. So 3.12 isn't quite ready for us and isn't quite ready for the software vendors the way that our calendar year timing works. So 3.11 is where it's at. And then I'll hand over to Francois for the rest.
Sure, and I'll note on the Python side, an area of follow-up as some of these Python versions have evolved, even minor ones. It's really useful to get feedback on which deprecated APIs are finally removed. That tends to be the biggest stumble that people run into, especially any that might have been used as part of the 2 to 3 transition. That's what we've been seeing around like 3.10, 3.11. We've seen more of these calls actually no longer existing, and that leads to code upgrades that are not just a simple bump up. So feedback on the platform discussion is always useful about that. The couple remaining here are really the industry, the visual effects and animation industry specific libraries, where we have OpenEXR 3.2 is already out there. And so certainly start developing and testing against it. And then new versions of OpenSubdiv, OpenVDB, OpenColorIO, where we, as usual, we tend to lean forward. There is good namespacing of symbols as well, and compatibility between file formats. These, as you can see, there's conditional notes on release dates. The way we've approached some of these late-breaking industry-specific libraries is that they will be included as long as they're released by their target date. Typically, for everything that's September 1st, but with both vendor and kind of industry community approval, we can push that a little bit later. We really don't want to do it too far because we're targeting applications that are released starting in January sometimes, January 2024, and vendors need enough time to be able to develop against new versions, QC against them, often against many different targets and OSs. So we really want everybody's buy-in when we agree to push to include a library that has a late-breaking release date. And if in the events where libraries don't make that target date, we just fall back on last year's target to not introduce yet another in between. Can move to the next one. To wrap it up, yeah, NumPy and Boost are being bumped to the most recent versions. This is something that we do every year. And that's CY 2024. I think like Nick said, this is meant to be finalized on September 1st. We do use discussions at SIGGRAPH as well, which is happening next week for any final kind of in-person come yell at us feedback. And specifically to move to one API that we had planned initially, that's one MKL, one TBV, is something that we've pushed to next year and are in discussion with Intel about making that as easy as possible as well. So at this point, we're really just waiting for feedback on any problems or concerns. Otherwise, this is what you'll expect to see approved. I'll hand it off to JF to talk about the ASWF Docker effort that's been going on.
Okay, hi everyone, can you hear me? So yes, so I've been taking part in the CI working group for the Academy Software Foundation, which is a lot more than just CI. We're kind of interested in tooling in general. And probably the most high-profile project that we deliver is the ASWF Docker project, which is basically an implementation of the VFX Reference Platform. So this was started by Alois Baillet at Animalogics, I believe, who's now at NVIDIA. And basically, it delivers a set of containers for the yearly implementations of Reference Platform, and then typically we'll do point releases throughout the year as the dot, as the third dot increases and the increases allowed by the platform. So it's based as a hierarchy of layered containers. There's a CI base, which kind of has the base OS and all the compilers and the tools. Then there will be a container for each of ASWF or ASWF adjacent projects. It does not contain the project itself. It just contains all the prerequisites for that project. So for instance, the CI OpenEXR container is meant to build OpenEXR. And then there's a catch-all VFX all that has everything in it already pre-built. So you could use that to build other things. These containers are used by most of the ASWF projects for their Linux CI builds. So rather than having to start with the generic builder provided by GitHub, they can get an environment that that meets all the requirements. And also a lot of projects want to support 2 or 3 years of the VFX platform. So that way they can get these reproducible environments. And for CY 2023, the base container is based on the Rocky Linux 8.8. It uses the GCC tool set from Red Hat for the right compiler version. And there's also Clang 14 and 15 in there for projects that use Clang. And there's the link to the GitHub repo is at the bottom. Next slide, thank you. So the base container contains both CUDA and OpenGL. So it can be used to run test suites that require CUDA. For OpenGL, it's a little bit more complicated because there's typically no X server running on the CI host. But if you were to run it on your own workstation, you can do it. And for instance, OCIO they can build their tool suite using the EGL wrap or library, which allows them to run their headless still with OpenGL. The containers can be used to build difficult to build open source projects. If you've tried to build recent things like Krita or things like that on CentOS 7, it can be really difficult to meet all the dependencies. So the VFX all container can be a really nice shortcut for that. The way that the containers are assembled is that there's both kind of individual containers for building packages, but also more and more we're transitioning to using Conan for building these dependencies. So and of course these Conan packages are built inside a container for a reproducible environment. The containers themselves are pushed to Docker Hub, and the ASWF does have a paid for unthrottled account. So if you are pulling those containers in your CI, it's not throttled, but of course they're still hefty containers. So it's not super fast the first time. And this is from a couple of months ago, but we'd had over 600,000 pulls on Docker Hub. So apparently a fair number of people and CI pipelines are using those. Next, thank you. So we also, as I was saying, we're building packages using Conan internally. And ASWF also has a JFrog Artifactory repository where those packages get pushed. So you could also, if you didn't want to consume the whole container, you could also just pull. You could also install using Conan, just pointing to that repository. And the hope is that because containers are not, well, there's no such thing as a macOS container really, and they don't work all that great on Windows. We're hoping that this transition to Conan is going to help with support for those platforms, because for now the effort's mostly Linux specific. And in the repo, you will find a number of recipes for the packages that have been Conanified. And also the Foundry has recently contributed over 100 recipes that they use for packaging open source projects as Conan. And we're hoping to incorporate more and more of those. For 2023, we have, of course, updated the set of components, both the ASWF and the non-ASWF. We've moved from CentOS 7.9 to Rocky 8.8. We've had to do some re-implementation because NVIDIA used to provide all the way up to OpenGL container, and they don't do that anymore. They only provide a CUDA, up to CUDA, but we've been able to kind of reproduce what they used to do. And hopefully that big transition has allowed us to parameterize a lot of the base image instead of having it hard coded, meaning that for future base OS images transitions, it should be easier. Next slide. And so what's coming up is support adding explicit build containers for some of the new ASWF projects, such as Open Review Initiative, OpenImage.io, OpenFX. Continuing the transition to only using Conan instead of these kind of intermediate containers that we've been using. Incorporate the contribution from Foundry. And by the way, that contribution is available in the CI working group repo, again, under the ASWF organization in GitHub. For CI 2024, I think some of the challenges are, do we transition to an EL 9 based distro? That's a good question. Do we support both? And then also the transition to Qt, because building Qt in PySide is probably the biggest time suck in those. So how that, and it's not easy to do, so that will have a fair amount of impact. And of course, there's always the longer term goal of supporting Windows and Mac OS. And here we're hoping that, as we leverage Conan more and more, it will hopefully help with those. So a quick plug on the ASWF Slack. There's a working group WG-CI channel, and anybody interested in tooling, please join us. We have a monthly call once a month, and I'd love to see new faces there. So, and thank you, François and Nick, for giving me the opportunity to present this, and back to you.
Right. No, thank you, and thank you, JF, and to everyone involved in the ASWF CI work. It's incredibly valuable for the whole community, but particularly with the VFX Reference Platform. We can come up with a set of versions, and really, it's that group who are the first to kind of try and build them all together, and often they catch issues and give us great feedback. So, so thank you for that. Right. Let's see if I can advance this slide. So, I know I can see from some of the attendees, there's lots of people who've been waiting for this part. VFX Linux recommendations. So as many of you know, we issued a recommendation report last year for Linux distributions, particularly for VFX and animation. And so it's 12 months on. We're less than a year away from the end of life and end of support for CentOS 7. Plus, there was a certain announcement recently from Red Hat, which a little bit put the cat amongst the pigeons and caused some concern. So it's a great time to revisit the recommendation and see where we stand today. For those of you who are not familiar with the recommendation, I'm going to go and read through it again, just to recap. If you really want the full gory details, there's a link at the bottom there. And by the way, I know we're sharing a lot of links in this presentation. At the end, we'll place them all in the chat, or we'll post them to the Google group or something, just so you've all got them, because I've seen a question about that. So we will share the links. Don't worry, you don't have to write them all down. So yeah, if you go to this link here to go to the full PDF report that explains the kind of the background and rationale to why this recommendation. But this is the recommendation we issued a year ago. For artist workstations running Linux, it's strongly recommended that all VFX and animation studios deploy Red Hat Enterprise Linux 9 or one of its binary compatible rebuild distributions, such as Alma Linux 9 or Rocky Linux 9 in 2023, and no later than June 24 for those still running CentOS Linux 7. DCC software vendors are encouraged to build their products on at least RHEL 8 or the downstream equivalent, and qualify all minor releases of RHEL 9 as being officially supported for their customers in 2023. So that was the kind of the primary recommendation. I've not got on the slide here, and I see people from Canonical have joined us too, so I will say there was a secondary recommendation for the, once we've achieved this primary recommendation, for the software vendors and providers to look at what it would take to support both RHEL and Ubuntu. And so that's something, you know, that's definitely something that's still in the mix. And another slide that we shared last year, this was a bit of the background, like how did we get to where this meeting last year? You know, it all started with a big decision in 2020 to pivot CentOS to CentOS Stream, which was a very different kind of philosophy and distribution. And that, per the emoji there, created a lot of consternation and reaction from the community. We came together at SIGGRAPH, recognized the need for coordination across the community. We announced a studio platform survey, we compiled the results and issued a report. From that report, it was clear that more action was needed around Linux, so we launched the Linux task force, and then last year we issued the VFX Linux recommendation. So many of you know this already, so what's new? Okay, so if we wind forward 12 months, you know, generally there was great reaction to that recommendation report, you know, better even than I think we hoped for. There's a lot of relief and a lot of support for the recommendation and an understanding of why we came to that, even if it wasn't necessarily everyone's preference. And it all was good, and people were working towards a recommendation, hopefully, in the background. And then a few weeks ago, Red Hat restricted access to RHEL source code. I'll explain more about what that means in a second. But this has a big impact on the, you know, or potentially could have a big impact on the downstream distributions of RHEL. And so again, we're in this moment where the community is like, WTF, what's going on? What do we do? So let me give a bit of recap, and I'm going to give a recap, and I'm just going to say there's a lot to this. There's a lot in writing out there that you can go and read. Very little of it is objective, I would say. So you know, bear in mind the biases involved when you're reading things. I'm going to try and be very kind of like neutral, or at least coming from a VFX and animation community perspective, and try and keep my personal opinions out of it. So Red Hat policy change. There was actually two things that happened. One was a while ago. They changed the Red Hat subscription agreement for paying customers, and they updated that to prevent customers from redistributing Red Hat software, including using it as a downstream rebuild. So as a paying customer of RHEL, I get access to all the source code, and I still have that even today after the policy change. But I'm not allowed to use that to rebuild a Linux distribution that's the same as RHEL, and then distribute that outside of my organization. So that was one part. And then the other part was removing public access to source code for the RHEL RPMs. And this was very much, I mean, you know, this is a legitimate business decision from Red Hat. People like it, they don't like it, support it or don't support it. You know, much has been written about it. Mike McGrath, poor Mike McGrath, is the one who kind of authored a lot of the blog posts around this and has been kind of the voice of Red Hat on this. I want to pull out one quote from one of the blog posts around this, because I think this kind of talks about kind of the rationale. You know, so to quote him, ultimately, we do not find value in a RHEL rebuild, and we are not under any obligation to make things easier for rebuilders. Rebuilders being groups like Alma Linux and Rocky Linux. And so the implication here is they want to make it harder, because you know, they feel like the success of Alma and Rocky is having an adverse impact on their business, or the harm is greater than the benefit as far as Red Hat's concerned. So that's what happened. Given our recommendation is based around RHEL and downstream distributions, you know, this is potentially impactful. And there was a lot of questions about what is the impact here. So after a lot of back and forth, responses from all the downstream distributions, I'll go through some of the highlights of those. You can read more about it at the links below. So Rocky Linux News, there's plenty more about it. But so a couple of key quotes. The process may evolve as we continue to seek more efficient solutions and automation. Nevertheless, we remain fully committed to ensuring that our users are not disrupted. Rocky Linux lives on. In the unfortunate event that Red Hat decides to ramp up efforts to negatively impact the community, Rocky Linux will persist to continue serving the best interests of the entire open source community. So fairly full-throated commitment there to, for as long as it's possible, maintaining a one-for-one, bug-for-bug compatible distribution with RHEL, and a you know, a kind of an implicit acknowledgement that if things do shift and not able to do that, they'll continue to do what they to support the community in the right way from their perspective. So I think, you know, that definitely gives some confidence in the future there. Maybe raises some questions too. Alma Linux took a slightly different route. So the ARMA Linux Foundation Board has decided to drop the aim to be one-for-one compatible with RHEL. ARMA Linux OS will instead aim to be application binary interface compatible. We will continue to aim to produce an enterprise-grade long-term distribution of Linux that is aligned and API compatible with RHEL in response to our community's needs to the extent it's possible to do so, and such that the software that runs on RHEL will run the same on ARMA Linux. Again, you can read more about it in the blog post. This is different. They're saying, we're not going to be one-for-one, bug-for-bug compatible with RHEL, but we're going to be binary compatible. And that means any software you build on RHEL, we expect it will work on ARMA Linux and vice versa. Interestingly, I happened to see a comment on LinkedIn from the same Mike McGrath who posted from Red Hat, who posted the blog post in response to this ARMA Linux post. And he said, and just like that, something new exists in the ecosystem. Seems like the system is working well to me, and ARMA has found a fine way forward. I look forward to our collaboration in CentOS and Fedora. And the reason I want to include this is because I think this shows like Mike, and therefore I assume Red Hat is supportive of the approach that ARMA Linux has taken. It's not a one-for-one, trying to duplicate exactly what RHEL is. It's doing something a little bit different, but retaining compatibility. And I know there was a concern in the community from like, oh, is there going to be this big arms race where Red Hat is going to try and like kill all the downstream distributions? Well, when I read this, it doesn't sound like they're going after ARMA Linux. It's saying like, oh, actually, we support this approach. So we'll see. Again, it's still early days. This has still only happened over the last few weeks, and it's still playing out. There are a couple of other responses that are worth noting. I'll try and keep a straight face here. Oracle Linux will continue to be RHEL compatible to the extent we can make it so. And there's some good commentary in that post. It's worth reading for various reasons. And then SUSE is forking publicly available RHEL and will develop and maintain a RHEL compatible distribution available to all without restrictions. Over the next few years, SUSE plans to invest more than $10 million into this project. That announcement is notable also for supported by a quote from Greg Kurtzer from CIQ, the organization behind Rocky, and we'll see how this all plays out. SUSE has Liberty Linux, so there's a whole there's lots of people jockeying for position here, things going on. I think there's a lot to digest. And so what does all this mean? Let's take a deep breath, try and figure it out. There's a lot to process. The big takeaways from my perspective here is like, despite all these changes, all the distribution options are still available and actively supported. All the distributions in the recommendation are, the organizations behind them are still fully committed to them. And so, I think that's encouraging. It's not like anything's actually been taken off the table at this point. And there's also a very practical consideration here. For large software vendors and large studios who have a lot invested in CentOS or the enterprise Linux tooling and ecosystem around that, there just isn't enough time to pivot to a completely different distribution before updates updates for RHEL 7 and CentOS 7 ends in June. So the end of life is next June. It's months away. If you want to migrate to something like Ubuntu or something different, it's potentially a bigger change, and there's just simply not enough time to do that, or at least that's what lots of the studios and vendors believe. So there's just a practical reality to this. So the VFX Linux recommendation still stands. The options are still available. It still makes sense. And I think certainly through to RHEL 9 and its downstream distributions and the rebuilds, I think you can do that with a great deal of confidence. I think the situation is still playing out, and we'll see what happens with RHEL 10 and the rebuilds of RHEL 10. And maybe we can talk about them more in discussion afterwards if there's interest in that. But as we all know, so that's what I just said. And then we all know the reality is, well, what are people actually doing? Are people actually following the recommendation? What's actually going on here? And so over the last kind of 10 days or so, we polled 14 different VFX animation studio CTOs, and just kind of handpicked a bunch of the bigger studios and said, hey, what are you doing with your Linux upgrades? What are you currently using, and what are you planning on upgrading to? And so this is the new thing, and we're not planning. We don't want to publicize this. This is a note. This next slide is not for redistribution. Please, I appreciate if we keep this in the room here, because the CTO has been very kind to share information that they don't necessarily want being plastered over every Linux forum. There's a lot to digest here, so we'll take our time to go through it. So we asked 14 studios. All 14 studios responded, which is great, and thank you to them for doing that. We just orient ourselves. On the left is the studio names. In the red is what are they currently using, and you can immediately see the vast majority are still on CentOS 7, and you just see like how prevalent CentOS has been in the visual effects and animation community. There's a couple of studios on RHEL, and one on Windows and one on Ubuntu. So there's a bit of a mix there. And what are they moving to? Well, immediately you see a lot of Alma Linux and a lot of Rocky Linux. So just, and again, remind you, this is just information from the last week or so. So this is post the Red Hat announcement. All these plans are still, these, despite those changes, people are still going down this path. So I think this should give you confidence that if you're moving to, if you're following the recommendation from the VFX Linux report, you're in very good company in doing that. And I'm not going to read through every single one. Out of the 14 responses, I can say, like, roughly speaking, 7 of the studios, or half of them, are actively considering Alma Linux. The same number, 7, are considering Rocky Linux. There are 5 considering RHEL and paying for RHEL, whether that's just for a portion of their infrastructure or all of it. There's 1 on here, but actually there was a couple who mentioned that they're actively looking and testing CentOS Stream, potentially for some of their infrastructure, maybe render farm or something like that. And then we have Weta, who've been on Ubuntu for a while and sticking with Ubuntu and very happy with the way that's working for them, and very complimentary about the support they've been getting from Canonical, by the way. So thank you to them for that support. If you're interested in, like, well, how does Weta run Ubuntu when none of the software is certified for Ubuntu? Kimball Thurston, who's the CTO at VFX, posted to VFX Platform Discuss recently, kind of describing their compatibility layer that they have, and as they're moving to Ubuntu 22, actually, they're able to move to vanilla kernel, having long been on custom kernel. So the barrier to doing that is decreasing over time. So yeah, I don't know, Francois, if there's anything else you want to chip in here, and I spent a lot of time on this, but.
No, I think this was just really reassuring in terms of the confidence of the industry moving in a common direction, which will make it a lot easier for everyone to continue to target Linux as a platform in general, and have a little more consistency in that approach as we kind of grow into it and make Linux a better platform over time. So this was definitely very reassuring.
Yeah, and most, if not all, are planning to, or at least saying they're planning on completing their upgrades by 2024. So, or by June of 2024. Some may go a little bit later for some of the other infrastructure.
And the one thing that we can also, I don't think you mentioned this, but in terms of the report recommendation from 2020, there was a bit of a difference between the recommendation that we give software vendors as to what to build against versus what we recommend the industry move towards. And that was the difference between a RHEL 8 platform for building and a RHEL 9 platform for deploying and leaning forward in terms of all the users and consumers of applications that are put out there. And that remains true today. Yeah,
no, thanks, Francois. We're nearly getting to the end of the slides. One more section just on upgrading to EL8 and 9. We've been sort of crowdsourcing for information, some tips on this, and the idea here is that all the studios are doing this. All the studios are going through the process of upgrading from CentOS 7 to a more modern distribution. So let's share our hard-won experiences, the tips and gotchas, what's involved in doing that. If we can create a set of tips and gotchas that will help other studios on their journey, so that as a community we can reduce the duplication of effort across studios and accelerate our move to a more modern distribution. I think that's going to be beneficial for all of us. So, what did you wish you'd known when starting out on your journey of your upgrade? What gotchas or upgrade tips have you discovered along the way? Please contribute them to the wiki there. We just published that wiki page a couple of days ago. Thanks to, and we crowdsourced the Google Docs. So those of you involved in that, we put all that information that's now moved to that wiki, which hopefully anyone can edit. We've already got a bunch of stuff covering a whole variety of topics. But please, that's going to be as useful as the contributions we get to it. So again, we'll share that link at the end with everything else. And then where can we continue the discussion, Francois?
Yeah, we've mentioned a lot of these. Just some more links. Again, we'll share a lot of these both in the chat, and actually there were a good comment. There were some questions around where to find these links. We will add them to the website as well. We have a contact section where we just have the top level link, but we'll try to aggregate a little bit more of this. So really The Google group is where some of the meatier discussions happen around the kind of in-depth back and forth around the platform itself. And then we've mentioned the Academy Software Foundation Slack, as well as the Studio Sysadmin Slack, that have grown a little more organically. And that's a place to have kind of more casual conversation or conversational back and forth. We do monitor both of those and follow up wherever we can. Nick, if you want to wrap it up.
Thanks. Yeah, trying to find the button, the wrap up button. Yes, no, it was, thank you very much. So thanks to all of you who contributed to all this work, not only in the presentation today, but thank you to everyone who continues to contribute to the VFX Reference Platform. The success of the platform is only as, is directly correlated with the amount of feedback and engagement that we get from the community. And I'm very pleased to say that's as good as it, as good as it's been. We have, I'm just saying now, we have over 160 people on the webinar right now, which is great. And so again, I think that demonstrates that engagement. So yeah, thank you for the feedback. Please keep it coming. And I think that's pretty much it. If I can get to this, so I will stop sharing my screen.
Yeah, and I think we had one question very specifically around where to find the links. Hopefully we've answered that. I just posted in the chat all of the links that are in the slide deck. I think I included all of them. And certainly if you have other useful references, especially tips in upgrading OS, please feel free to share it on both the discussion groups or the Google Platform Discuss group.
Great, thanks. And there we are, just kind of catch up on some of the chat messages. And certainly there's been Justin Burdine, thank you very much. So Justin Burdine was saying that he's very happy to support anyone who's interested in moving to Rocky. I know that people from Canonical on the are here as well. I know that I don't know if Jack's here today, but Jack from Armor Linux has been very supportive. So I have to say, and then of course I got to mention Bob Davis, who's the product manager from Red Hat. We've had really great engagement from all the Linux distributions. I just had a meeting with someone from SUSE last week, so there's a lot of interest and engagement from the organizations behind these Linux distributions wanting to support us, which is great. And I think that's more so than I've experienced over the last 20 years, certainly since the industry been on Linux. So I think despite the uncertainties and the changes going on, I think that's a very healthy sign.
Yeah, there was one question in the Q&A, which was how can we proceed in order to contribute to the open source project development of the VFX Reference Platform as a software vendor? Nick, did you want to answer that, or?
No, sorry, I was just saying it's being answered live. I didn't get to,
no worries.
Not me.
Honestly, the biggest value is really being active on the discussion groups and providing your experience, the challenges you run into as a software vendor. Nick mentioned the note that Mark Menke had provided kind of with the RenderMan context. Every software vendor has a slightly different set of contexts and challenges and things that they're up against. The timeline of the release within the year can be challenging. When you release later, it's going to be easier than when we release earlier and have less runway to deal with QA. The kinds of dependencies that you have, whether you're multi-platform or not. And even though the working group includes just 3 of the larger software vendors to at least get kind of a baseline of agreement, we really, really value the feedback from everyone out there providing, whether it's small plugins, whether you're just contributing to open source, or if you're building applications at a large scale, all of that is really, really useful. And the Google group discussion is where we value the most that feedback.
Yeah, and if you're not comfortable commenting or communicating on a public forum, there's also feedback@vfxplatform.com, that email address that just goes to the working group members, and that can be private. So there's 8 or 9 of us on that. There's another question here from Robin, which I'll answer. Yes, it's something that I said. Is there a source for when and how Red Hat quietly changes subscription agreement? And yes, I did say that. And that's a really great question. I apologize, because that may not be accurate. Like that may be, again, it's really hard to find objective information about this, and I haven't gone back myself. Even actually on my day job, I am a paying Red Hat customer, but I haven't gone back and analyzed all the previous agreements. So maybe it has always been that way, and I'm just repeating some of the FUD that others are saying, or maybe it's accurate. I don't know. You need to do your own research on that one. But thank you for calling that one out. Yeah, it maybe that's always been a thing. Although I do know that there are RHEL customers who have been distributing RHEL and now feel like maybe they shouldn't be, and so but that's that's a matter between them and RHEL, or them and Red Hat.
Just there was Vlad had a quick note that actually that unfortunately it's not. I don't think it's a Mac specific issue. It's a Zoom issue. Sometimes copy paste is disabled in chat for dubious reasons, but yes, we'll include all of these on the website as well, and maybe as a follow up, we can actually just post to a platform discuss.
Yeah, we'll post them to the Google group, I think. Any plans to repeat the platform survey? There's been requests to repeat the platform survey. I would say it's quite a time-consuming exercise. What we did was by polling the studio CTOs, that was kind of like an informal small sample size of doing a platform survey just specifically around Linux distributions. And I should have counted out how many desktops that represents, but I would imagine it represents, could be around 20,000 desktops, something like that between the groups that responded. If there are particular, if you, and I've heard this from a few people, so if you think a platform survey, you would benefit from a platform survey, we should do another one. What questions would you want us to ask? Either send me that directly or put it in the Google group. We can start a thread there about that. And if there's enough interest and enough good questions, then we'll dive in and do another platform survey.
And I would say, in addition to just what questions we would want to ask, I think it's also what kind of outcomes, what kind of decisions we would make based on those answers. The hope with the survey is really to set major multi-year direction that can at least infuse a sense of stability, because that is what gives trust and confidence that software vendors can and should invest time in supporting Linux, and they can at least reliably predict that for a certain amount of time, their efforts, they're going to be able to amortize those efforts. And so we don't necessarily want to be in a situation where every year we reevaluate based on trends. And it's a little bit the same on the more general platform, where we always have to strike the balance between leaning forward where it really makes a differess, and then sometimes being a little bit more conservative to not overwhelm everyone with changes every single year. And it would be the same thing around an OS recommendation. So it is really useful to get feedback as to what are people doing as time goes by. So the notion of a survey isn't necessarily a bad one, but we'd want to manage expectations around what would be the outcome of that survey.
I just want to address that there was a question in the chat as I'm scrolling through that too, and we'll give priority to the Q&A. So if you put stuff in the chat, we can't get to it all. So if you want to put it in the Q&A, we'll hopefully try. Jason, hi Jason. Jason asked, there was a possibility of a report from a desktop environment task force this year. Is that still an effort? Good question. Yeah, we talked last year about a workstation experience working group and the idea of a sysadmin hub, like some kind of community wiki. Those things haven't really taken off, and really that's due to a lack of, I would say, a lack of engagement. And we've really not been able to get enough community engagement in that. It's also not just people wanting to kind of just share their opinions and preferences. It's also, I'm looking for people to help kind of lead some of these initiatives too, because like I said, this isn't my day job. I've got lots of other things to do, and I occasionally need to see my kids as well. So I'm looking for anyone, and Francois and others in the work group do a great job of stepping up and helping, like and JF and Francois and I lead this thing together. So really looking for others in the community who are maybe interested in getting some more kind of leadership experience. This could be a great opportunity, but until we get that, it's hard. We don't really have the bandwidth to take on more initiatives just yet, and it's something I'm planning on talking to the studio CTOs about actually at SIGGRAPH next week.
There was actually a separate question about whether or not general VS members can participate or get involved in the VS Tech Committee. Yes, absolutely. I think some of these efforts, especially, we essentially have task forces, working groups around some of these topics to dig into it. A lot of the folks that are actually on the VS Tech Committee itself, like Nick and myself, We kind of pick some efforts that we're invested in, but it like everybody, it can be challenging to make time. And anyone who has the appetite and the passion for any topic, we always welcome that kind of help.
I'll take the question about why are there negative, or is there a reason there's negative connotations associated with Oracle and SUSE? I shouldn't have implied that. I think there's Oracle has been involved in lots of different businesses, and sometimes they've had to make tough business decisions that haven't made it easy for the sysadmin community, and so sometimes there's a bit of trauma associated with that. And so I think have a read of what they've done, have a look at what they've done, and you can form your own opinion about that. The SUSE, no, I mean the SUSE thing is the reason some people ask, particularly in Europe. I mean, SUSE have much more of a presence in Europe than they do in the US, and it just studios don't, for one reason or another, just SUSE does not have a big presence in visual effects and animation. I don't think there's any particular reason for that overall. I think it's a great distribution. They're obviously, looking at the Red Hat changes, maybe an opportunity for them to kind of have more of an impact. So we'll wait and see. But no, I didn't mean to apply any negative connotations, other than there's less of a presence from Oracle and SUSE from a Linux perspective in the visual effects and animation community as it stands today.
And I'll mention, Corey asked if there's any public or consolidated source of information about how current and upcoming releases of software from the member vendors or others align with, or more importantly, diverge from a particular platform calendar year. It's actually something we've discussed a few times. Some vendors have made attempts at publishing the dependencies and the versions that they rely on. We haven't had a single consolidated place. Some of that is it's kind of tricky to wrangle. Some of it is how do you crowdsource and then mandate feedback. We've even had suggestions of the equivalent of a logo program, just like an Intel Inside sticker on your on your computer. Here you'd have a VFX platform compliant. There's some amount of compromise that's always involved. What we tend to recommend with vendors, given that every once in a while they can't follow 100% the platform, is at least if you can follow the current year platform entirely, use versions from a previous year platform, so you're not introducing additional new variables that people haven't had to deal with at all. So there is a little bit of a mix of, we encourage the vendors to publish this. We have not made the effort of consolidating it in a single place.
Yeah, thanks, Jacob. Lawrence had a question. Is there a response from software vendors on the VFX platform Linux OS recommendations? Feeling positive? I think yes. I mean, for the Linux recommendations themselves, the Linux task force worked hand in hand with the software vendors, and so very much part of that. I think it's each software vendor has its own set of considerations, Lawrence, as you well know, has considered how we balance these things. But yes, they're all supportive of the Linux recommendation, and it's up to all of us collectively as a community, as paying customers of these vendors, to make sure that we tell people it's important that they follow these community guidelines and recommendations. And if they're paying customers, tell them that they're going to be more inclined to do so. I would say the recent Red Hat news and that change. I think I talked to some of the software vendors about it, and they were saying, particularly from some of their smaller studio customers, they were seeing a lot of anxiety, and some people quickly jumping to other distributions, which was causing them real concern. But I think hopefully what we're sharing today and just seeing what the large studios are doing, gives us all confidence that actually the thing we're all afraid of is fragmentation, and suddenly every studio starts using different distributions, makes it very much more costly to support Linux from a software vendor perspective. So we need to avoid that happening, and I think as a community we're successfully doing that so far.
There was a question about sneak peeks for the upcoming SIGGRAPH. I think you just saw all of the sneak peeks.
Yeah, there's none. Yeah, for those of you, because SIGGRAPH this year, the Birds of Feather is in person only. We didn't want, we value the people, the input in the community here who can't travel to SIGGRAPH, and so this is it. This is all of it. At SIGGRAPH, for those of you who are there, we're going to get together in a room when there's going to be no presentation. Although I can maybe, if there's an AV system there, I can bring up the same slides we saw today. But really, it's to carry on the discussion and ask questions and have more of a back and forth than we're able to do over a Zoom webinar.
Bring tomatoes or hugs.
Yeah. Someone here we go. Yeah, anonymous attendee asked, can VS members participate or get involved in the VS Tech Committee side of things? If so, how? The VS Tech Committee, it's a small committee of I think about 12 to 15 members, and we have a process for which we bring in new members. It's just, yeah, if you're interested in doing that as a VS member, reach out to Francois or I, and we can introduce you to Sebastian Silwan, who's chair of that committee, and we can talk about the process there. But yeah. And then there's lots of messages in the chat that I haven't got to. I think
we've gotten most of them.
Yeah, and thanks. Oh, it's a message from Bob from Red Hat. Just confirm from his perspective, the subscribe agreement hasn't changed in the last 6 years that he's been at Red Hat. So my bad. I apologize. I think I was repeating something that I've heard that I didn't fact check. So again, it's a mea culpa, but it just shows how difficult it is to get objective information sometimes. So on this topic. There is a bit, yeah. So that is something I would say, like when you're talking to any of the distribution providers, there's a lot of let's just say there's lots of different agendas and incentives going on. So make sure you're doing a better job than me of fact checking, particularly if you're going to present to a couple hundred people.
And we can, I think Joe just mentioned in one of the questions that like Autodesk Maya 2024 is listing Rocky 8.6 with no indication of Rail 9 or compatible. Again, the recommendation for vendors is to build on Rocky 8. What we also recommend is that they QC it on a Rail 9 compatible distro. Ideally, we'd have vendors mentioning that on the site to avoid confusion. And that's something that we can maybe discuss within the working group as well. But it is not unusual to see or not concerning to see a vendor building on Rocky 8 because that is our recommendation.
That was I going to share the yeah. Oh, I was going to think just at the beginning as we were talking with JF, and JF just was pointing out that one of the issues we've had for a while is that there hasn't been a Realm 9 compatible or an officially supported version of now called HP Anywhere, Teradici, Picoip, whatever you want to call it. There hasn't been a Realm 9 certified version. There is now, in later release, they do officially support Realm 9, so that's important. It's been working. Many studios are using it on Realm 9, but now it's officially supported. Okay, I think, well, we're just coming up to the end of the hour, so I think that's plenty. And so thanks so much for so many of you for turning up, and thanks again to everyone involved in contributing to all the information that we shared and to the Q&A. For those of you who do happen to be in Los Angeles next week for SIGGRAPH, please come to our Birds of a Feather, which is on either Monday or Tuesday, I can't remember, but it's early next week.
Tuesday.
Yeah, it's on Tuesday, and we'll be able to have a much more sort of informal back and forth, and hopefully share more insights from the community. You're not just hearing from Francois and I. Great. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.